Okay, so this is taken from the original paper. It was set up like this. Here's just an example, probably distribution, and it's just a product. This is a bit of a funny looking thing, but Pij, right? So it's just going to be two Gaussian-like structures. They've got a bit of an offset in them, but two Gaussian-like pieces. So they have right e to the, this is x squared. Obviously, this is decaying like e to the minus x squared or e to the minus y squared. So it's going to be fairly rapid. This is going to be, but these fires are going to be in the corner of this thing. It's going to have something where we have slightly different standard. These are standard deviations, slightly different standard deviations. So you'll see that effect as we look through it. Right. So the idea is we're going to have, and I should probably do it like this. There's going to be sort of a, if you think about the probability distribution of sparks, it's going to be a Gaussian going this way multiplied by a Gaussian coming down this way. So it really drops off fast, right? E to the minus x squared, depending on these scales. And over here it will be as small as possible. But it's going to be asymmetric. All right, so that's what's underneath all of this. So we're going to spend some time on understanding this thing. How are we doing? All right, so there are 4 examples here, different designs. 1, 2, n, and n squared, right? So 1 means you're always randomly choosing a location to test. That's just part of this, right? So you're always randomly choosing where to put your next tree. The question is, can you choose, how many times can you try that? So with 1 try, and I'll explain why these densities are different, right? So white means a tree, and black means in effect no tree, but you can see that there are these fire breaks that have appeared. Okay, so let's just focus on A for a start. So D equals 1. So in this case, again, the white spaces are the trees. It's slowly been filling up, and you can see it's very random looking, right? And this is the outcome of a random allocation of trees, because you put a tree down, you run all the fires and do all that sort of stuff. But actually, that's of no information to you because you can't do anything else, right? You've chosen the next location. You don't have anything to compare it with. You're just going to put it there. So that's been filled in randomly. In this case, you've had 2 to choose from, right? So you put in, maybe we're going to put right? You have to choose from the pore space. So we're going to put a tree here. We test it. So make this white, test it. Obviously, any spark in any of this structure, right, will burn. If you put a spark in any of this white space, which is all connected, you see it's connected there. It's actually all of this. So anything that happens outside of this fire break, I think there, burns all of that. So it's not great, right? And this was built out of, just 2 choices. So you're not really exploring much of what's possible. This one is built out of n choices, so this is n by n. So it's a square root of the number of possible locations. Of course, those locations, the possible locations get smaller as you go in, which is a bit of a funny feature. So this one, there's some funny ones here. Obviously, you look at this and you say, well, you could put a tree there, right? And you could put a tree there. But this thing didn't find them, right? Because at this last step, well, I need to explain that properly, but at the last step where it stopped, it didn't choose these as possible ones, right? There are n, in this case it's 64. It chose 64 of these black squares, tested them, and nothing improved. And you can see why that would be, right? Anything you put here, you put a tree in any of this line here, and suddenly you've breached this fire break, right? And it will connect. Anything burning here or here will get all of this. So they're all linear kinds of structures, so you're going to breach any of them with allocating 1 more. It's true that these pieces are okay. This one, because you'll test everything, it's n squared, you won't add any more at this point. You can't find, right? You will find anything that's isolated. And so you see there are no double things in here and so on. There's no way to improve this. Okay, so why are these? So there are obviously, there's a lot more white space here. Oh, this is a very thick forest compared to this one, and then this one. All right, let's get some more pieces in here, right? So the underlying distribution for sparks, as I said, it's a Gaussian that falls away quickly this way and less quickly this way. Right, so that's why there's some sort of asymmetry here, right? This is spreading out a little bit because the sparks are not as bunched up. So there's more protection needed this way because the sparks are much more concentrated this way than they are this way. All right, so the game has been that you fill up, right? You run these processes, 1, 2, n, so 64 and then 64 squared. You run them until adding one more tree makes your yield worse. That's why these are stopped at these different points, right? So this is one, and so if the problem you're working on for the square lattice percolation, it's about 57% is the fraction, or sorry, the percentage of filled spaces at which you get a giant component, right? So you can fill half of this up, and then you start to fill up a little bit more than that, and you get to 57%. Adding one more tree here will start, it's finite, but you get to the point where adding one more tree will start to connect up a whole batch, right? And then you're in trouble because suddenly the whole thing explodes. You'll see that more as you go along with this percolation thing. But it means that you're well short. I mean, these are almost filled with trees, right? This is a 2D space filled with trees, and there's just some linear structures in here, right? So and that's a big piece here. We have a two-dimensional structure that's being protected by one-dimensional structures. So as we could also go down to one-dimensional structures. So if we have a line and we want to protect things on that line, and we have some attack on that line in some way, then you'd chunk it, right? So whether your attacks are more concentrated, you'd have more fire breaks around that. So imagine just a row of trees. And if there are no attacks out here, then you'd sort of you'd sort of put all your fire breaks over here, right? Your fire breaks are you can think of them as resources, right? This is the way this will get turned around. We can think of them as resources in the sense that they have to be maintained. Even though we're building this thing, if you want to start to think about a more real forest situation, you'd have to create these fire breaks and then maintain them. It's costly. You have finite costs, so the game becomes, you have some cost associated with looking after your system. How do you allocate it so as to best minimize loss? This will then be connected later in the next piece about, and I think this is a really deep connection between how do you allocate hospitals and Starbucks and these sorts of things, right? So that you optimize something about people's experiences, whether it's like the shortest distance to a hospital, on average the distance between people and their nearest hospital is as short as possible, or from a, like a coffee store's point of view, Starbucks point of view, they want as many people in the door. They're not really worried about how far you come from. So they might allocate things differently. There's a flip. We'll get to that, but there's a flip in there that connects this as well. Okay, so optimized forests, they do well on average, right? So they're optimized. And the thing is, this was much lighter weight than this one to create, right? This is a harder thing to do. N squared's a lot. This is a big deal. So you get something that looks this is not good, right? I mean, this isn't very structured looking, even though you see the emergence of it just with this 2, and even with randomness, you see that kind of blocking in there. I think, right, there's a fire break around that little block, around that little block, maybe a few. But it is hard for it. It's, it's sort of feeling around the dark a little bit. Rare extreme events will still occur, right? So this probability distribution is, it's non-zero over here, right? It's falling away. It's really concentrated. Most of if we think about lightning strikes, and most of the lightning strikes are here in this area, and it's reflecting the underlying attack distribution. But lightning strikes certainly can still happen out here. They're rare, and if they do, huge win for them, right? If you're on the team lightning, it just goes dink. For the greater good, right? So, okay. So that's robustness, fragility. And then look at, let's look, these are connected to the previous page. So, all right, just this one really is the main one. So the idea is, let's take this dotted line here, which goes up like this. This is our randomly filled in one, the design D equals 1 case, right? So we're adding, and density is 1 here, so we're adding one at a time. We don't have any real way to test it if it's better than anything else, so we just add them randomly. And then this is the percolation threshold. We've been adding them randomly, and now we've filled in enough trees that we've started to make a large component. And if we keep doing it, right, so we keep adding trees, which we can do, right? Just keep adding trees, keep adding trees, keep adding trees. Eventually we fill the whole thing up, and then it all burns anyway, but it's pretty bad, it gets pretty bad quickly, right? There's a peak here, and then it really drops off. So you've made a giant component of trees, and there are little isolated trees that are separated off that are safe, but eventually you connect to them and everyone gets connected. So we don't just get to the percolation thing and then maybe it keeps going up. I think in the large limit of large N, this really sharpens up because suddenly you've got a big giant component of trees that can burn. So the designless one, right, the mindless one, is really different to even the design of 2, even the most modest amount of design as well as this goes. Yes?
Do foresters ever use these types of things to figure out where to put trees?
There's been a lot of different policies about, I'm sure some of you know more about this than me, and I was going to, there's a podcast I was going to, I think it's 99% design, maybe, forest. There's still just a tremendous amount of argument, actually, about how to do this well. And so there was a push for a long time to stop all fires. Right, so they stopped all fires, just put anything out, right? And, it's bad. And what that created, though, was these huge connected spaces, connected forests that had dry material in it, and then the big ones were awful. So you need to let things burn. So that's tricky, right? Yeah. So Australia, they do, it's just like stuff's on fire all the time. So because of Mad Max, or it's underwater. But there's been a real move to saying, all right, go let it burn. So there are controlled burns and all sorts of things. But in terms of, breaks and so on, I think that's right. There was another piece in there about buildings, the way buildings worked. Codes have changed over time. People have come up with things that seem great, but they've imperiled everyone. I think the materials on houses were incredibly flammable, which obviously makes sense. In Australia, people would build too close to. They were just because it's beautiful. You're out in the bush. You've got these eucalyptus trees everywhere, which burn like crazy. But they're beautiful. They smell good, right? So you end up with homes just in the middle of trees. The trees are right next to the house and so on, and things explode. Really bad. So let me find that, because I know that tracks some of the political stuff, people being ousted and this is a terrible idea, and bad things happen. Depending on where we finish, I'll show a feel-good thing to do with forest fires. So this is design equals 2. So this one, adding more and more trees has been good, actually, right? Because the average forest fire size has been really small. That's what this really shows. This is the yield curve. So yield, again, is the fraction of the space that's filled by trees minus the average forest fire size. So as it's going up like this, right, this is the overall density. If it's going up linearly like this means that the average forest fire size is 0, basically. Right? Nothing's being reduced off here. But when you get to here, now you have, it's finally become connected enough that you're in trouble, and it's really not going to work out. And so again, that was this thing that didn't look great. But it was managed to find, that this is a dangerous situation, and accidentally sort of build a wall around it. Not entirely accidentally, but with this sort of limited design, build a wall around this thing. So it's going to stop. This is a snapshot of one of these forests that's exactly at this point, right? And the one for design equals 1 is here. That's the density. It only got to 57%. This one is closer to 90%, which is pretty impressive. I should get that back. And then design levels of n and n squared basically look indistinguishable on this graph. They go very close to filling everything up. And again, you're looking after a 2D space with 1D barriers. So they're very thin. You know, I mean, obviously, a large enough scale, they'll be incredibly thin. But they require, if we think about maintenance in some way of this being actually about a real forest, then there's cost to maintaining them, and that's why we could build forest breaks everywhere. We could make tiny little patches. Then you have problems with ecology, right? You know, whatever animals need to, be able to have a big enough range and so on. So that might be problematic as well. And then again, some plants need the burning thing, which is messed up. Evolution is just messed up. Okay. Evolution needs some sort of avatar. I know there's the blind watchmaker, but it doesn't really sell like Santa Claus, right? You need some charismatic anthropomorphism, right? What's that?
So not primordial.
Yeah, see, maybe it wins. But Dawkins is the blind watchmaker, which, I guess also knows as a watch, so that's cheating. Okay, and this one is for, this is a different one. This is for really small n's, which is kind of hilarious. So this is n equals 2. This is a 2 by 2 with trees in it. I don't know how they even, it just seems ridiculous. Anyway, 2 squared to 2, that might be a mistake. 2 squared up to 2 to the 7. So this is a thing where we're building up and design equals 2. Yes, right. So this is a design equals 2 case. This is what happens as you grow the lattice, as you make a bigger and bigger forest. This is a finite story, right? So what's the effect of making the lattice bigger? And you can see it's approaching some limiting thing here. I know I really need that in this course. There's a lot you can do with running a simulation on some size lattice and then increasing it, and then seeing how things scale. It's a very natural question. But this suggests that it actually is approaching something, right? That there's some, and this is for the d equals 2 one, that it's approaching something that's just a bit over 90%, and that's a sort of a real limiting case. Analytically, that would be probably impossible to work out. It's a bit of a stylized model. Okay, so some of this is a bit funny to look at, but it's worth, you'll see if you can reproduce these. So some ridiculous graphs. So this is the cumulative probability. So this is what we call a complementary cumulative probability distribution. People have different names for some of these things. So this is the distribution of forest fires at that peak density, right? So if you run it, or you test this thing, this is the distribution. Not really super power lawy, but that's what they're trying to claim there. And certainly you get it out analytically. This is a small example, 64 by 64. And then this is, well, d equals n squared and n equals 64 at equal density increments. So this is a, okay, so this is a very interesting one. So this is the super designed one, right? Over here, this is the super designed one. And right, so d equals n squared. It's for 64 by 64 again. And then the idea is, as you go up through here, right, from bottom curve, this is when the density is at 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what this suggests is that, and it's not bad, I guess the colors go back and forth. And this is a ridiculous scale here, right? This is 20 orders of magnitude here, so it's all compressed. The idea is to, what they're claiming to show here is that as this thing is being built in this super design version, right? So we're just looking at this close to 100% filled version, but it's being filled in. It didn't look like this ever, but it's being filled in. It's sort of finding the structure slowly, and it'll be interesting to look at that over time. I should have that. Yeah. Okay. Yep. As this is, so I don't have a plot of this, but as this is filling in, it's creating structures pretty quickly. It's finding this shape pretty quickly. And then when you test it, the claim of this graph is that even when it's only 10% filled and up to 9% filled, it's still got these power law size distributions for fires. So this is away from the best yield point. So this is a very important thing, right? So the stuff we've looked at up until this point has been about, we're designing these forests, and we get to the best ones, and then show, what they look like. But actually, in this whole build process, there are these power law size distributions for these forest fires all the way along. So it doesn't have to be tuned to be that. As long as there's some, whatever the density is, there's some sort of process that's acting on this system to iteratively, over evolution perhaps, or some sort of clever engineers, make it more safe, then you're going to end up with these uneven distributions, which is all very good. It's just that terrible things can happen, right? So this is super well designed. It looks, it's very non-random, right? This is a low entropy, what we call a low entropy state, right? You can't, if you reach into the bag of all n by 64 by 64 matrices where you've put ones in them, right? You've put, say, 98, filled up whatever 95% of them with ones. You've just thrown ones down. Right? So random matrices is a whole huge deal that people think about for all sorts of reasons. But if you threw all those things down, you would never get this one, right? It's in the bag, right? This bag contains all possible random matrices with this many ones and this many zeros in it. Just you would never pick that one out. You would always pick out things that look like this, right? We'll see that later for networks too. The big bag of networks that I have to say this over and over. It only contains, or it seems to only contain networks where the number of friends that each node has conforms to a Poisson distribution. These are Edish-Renyi distributions, networks, I should say. Pure random networks. Trouble is, they don't exist in the real world, right? No one has ever seen one in the real world. Lots of networks have been looked at now. There are just none. It's just in the big bag of random networks that if you keep reaching in and pulling them out, right? So every network that has 10,000 nodes and say 20,000 edges, you've got that bag. It says n equals 10,000 and m equals 20,000 on the side, right? So it's a huge thing, right? Combinatorial explosion. Everyone you pull out has this Poisson degree distribution. But in there, and so you never see them in the real world. But in there are real world ones, right? Because you've allowed every possible one. It's just that you never find them this way because they're grown, right? They become things. And so pure mathematics and combinatorics were playing around with this stuff, which was super fun for like 50 years, and all these people who didn't live in houses like Edish, for example. If you know this guy, right? He's just shipped around the world from place to place. Never allowed to drive a car. He was on speed the whole time, which is interesting. Worth reading about if you don't know about Paul Edish, one of our Hungarian greats. He went off speed for a while because of some bet or something about his health, and then only lasted a month, and he came back saying mathematics has been harmed because he was really out there, called children epsilons and stuff like that. Anyway, so, which is all good, right? I mean, well, maybe not that bit, but I mean, it's fine to think about pure math and so on. It's just that in this is a good example of like, the universe didn't produce any of those, right? And so those things only exist in people's brains, which are very creative things. But, okay, so this is a similar sort of story. You're never going to get this by just randomly sort of shuffling around, right? It has to be made by engineers or beavers or whatever, things that have plans, which turns out to be also evolution over a long period of time. Okay. So, pretty interesting, right? So, when we get to, I'll come back to self-organized criticality, we'll come to that in a little bit. This is very much against self-organized criticality, which expresses the idea that there's just this one critical sort of structure of the system or critical point that somehow nature or natural systems or whatever it is pushing towards that point. So this is a big deal. That this building, growing process could produce these power law size distributions roughly independent of the density of it. That's kind of huge.